My ex left me for a chance at love, and somehow it turned into her telling her new husband that I'd be the one paying for his kids. But to really understand how things got to that point, you have to go back about 8 years. That's when Adu and I broke up, not long after our twins were born. The truth is, we hadn't even been together that long, maybe around 14 months, when she found out she was pregnant. We both kind of panicked. It felt like everything was moving too fast, and in that moment we did what a lot of people do. We told ourselves maybe we should try to make it work for the kids. You start thinking a relationship might just fall into place because there's a family involved now, like somehow that will be enough to hold everything together. If I'm being honest, we weren't exactly compatible from the beginning. Sure, we had some good times, moments that felt easy and natural, but it wasn't anything deep or long-lasting. There wasn't that solid foundation people talk about. Still, when she got pregnant, I thought maybe we could push through, figure things out, and make it work. For the twins, it felt worth trying. But we were about as compatible as chalk and cheese. Even so, we gave it our best shot. For a while, things were okay. We had arguments like any couple does, but nothing major, nothing that felt impossible to get past. We managed to co-parent reasonably well, and we weren't constantly at each other's throats. Then she met someone new, someone she believed she could actually build a future with. And honestly, I understood that. She wanted a fresh start, something different from what we had. She was upfront about it, and in the end, we both agreed that splitting up was the best decision. I can't even say I was heartbroken. The relationship had never really been that strong to begin with. If anything, it felt like we were just acknowledging what had already been there. We ended things about as amicably as a breakup can go. After that, we settled into a rhythm with co-parenting. Things were smooth, or at least as smooth as they can be when two people are raising kids from separate homes. We split our time pretty evenly, kept communication focused on the kids, and actually co-parented pretty well. We both made a real effort to make sure the twins weren't caught in the middle of any tension. The kids spent time with both of us, and since everything was divided evenly, there was no need for child support. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Then, about 2 years after we split, Adu met the man who is now her husband. He wasn't the guy she started dating right after we broke up. He came later, and here's where things start to get more complicated. He had a daughter, and she was the same age as our twins. Adu told me about him, about how serious things were getting, and I genuinely wanted to support that. If it made things easier for the kids, I was all for it. I didn't have an issue with them having another father figure around. In fact, I thought it might even be a good thing. But then things started to shift. It began when she brought up the idea of including her stepdaughter in the same way we included our twins in everything. First, it was casual. She mentioned how nice it would be if we could all do things together, like one big family. On the surface, it didn't seem like a big deal. I figured she was just trying to blend the families, make things feel normal for the kids. But then it started to feel off. She began suggesting that I should treat her stepdaughter like she was my own. And I want to be clear, I have nothing against that little girl. She's just a kid caught in the middle of all this. None of this is on her. But Adu seemed to think that because we were all connected through the twins, I was somehow responsible for making her stepdaughter part of every activity, every outing I had planned with my own kids. When we first talked about it, I tried to explain things calmly. I told her I understood why she wanted everyone included, and I respected that, but it wasn't my responsibility to act as a father to her new husband's child. I already had my hands full being a good dad to my twins. But she didn't let it go. She kept pushing the idea, and I tried not to get frustrated because co-parenting is tricky. You're constantly trying to balance what's best for your kids while also keeping some kind of peace with your ex and their new partner. But the expectations just kept building. Eventually, things took a turn. She started expecting me to babysit her stepdaughter whenever I had my twins. If I planned something simple, like taking my kids out for the weekend, she'd call and ask if I could take her stepdaughter along too. At first, I didn't mind doing it occasionally. Helping out once in a while didn't seem like a big deal. But it stopped being occasional. It became expected. And that's where it started to bother me. Because I didn't sign up to be a third parent to her husband's child. I didn't think that was fair, not to me and not even to my own kids. Over time, I noticed a pattern. Every time I planned something special for my twins, it somehow turned into being about the other kids in her household. It felt like I wasn't allowed to have time that was just mine with my own children anymore. Even when I bought gifts or planned small surprises, there would be comments. It wouldn't take long before I'd hear that it wasn't fair if her stepdaughter wasn't included in the same way. There was even a time she got upset because I didn't spend as much on a gift for her stepdaughter as I did for our twins. That was the moment I realized something had to change. I had to draw a line somewhere. I made a decision after that. I told myself I'd keep my time, my energy, and my resources focused on my twins. When I explained that to her, it went exactly how I expected it would. She didn't take it well at all. She said I was being selfish, that I wasn't supporting her whole family. In her mind, this was supposed to be one big blended family, everyone included, everyone treated the same. But that wasn't something I had ever agreed to, and it definitely wasn't something I had signed up for. I tried to explain it as calmly as I could. I told her that of course I wanted my twins to feel like they belonged, like they were part of something stable and loving. But that didn't mean I had to take on responsibility for kids who weren't mine. Not in the same way, not financially, not emotionally as a parent. That line mattered to me. She wasn't happy about it, not even close. But despite that, we managed to keep things civil enough to continue co-parenting. At least on the surface. Underneath, though, something had shifted. Since that conversation, it hasn't really felt like co-parenting anymore. It's more like parallel parenting, if that makes sense. We each stick to our own time with the kids. We don't really do things together as a group anymore. No shared outings, no trying to act like one big family. We don't mix the kids from her household with mine during my time, and we don't share plans the way we used to. And honestly, it's simpler that way. For me, it means I can focus on my own kids without constantly navigating all these extra expectations she keeps trying to add. It takes a lot of pressure off. But even then, every now and then, she'll bring it up again. Like I'm supposed to feel guilty for not stepping in and helping raise every child under her roof. Like I'm somehow falling short because I'm not playing along with her version of what this family should look like. Over the years, things on her side have only gotten more complicated. She and her husband had a baby together, and later on, they took in her husband's nephew. So now, in her house, it's not just my twins and their stepsister anymore. There's also a step-cousin and a half-sister in the mix. Adu tries hard to keep it all together, to present it as one big, happy, unified family. And I get why she wants that. But I've been clear from the start, my role is with my kids. That's it. So yeah, it's complicated. Every time it feels like things have settled, like we've finally found some kind of balance, something new comes up, another expectation, another situation where I'm somehow supposed to step in. But through all of it, I've stuck to my boundaries. And honestly, I don't think it's unreasonable to focus on the two kids who are actually mine. There's a difference between supporting her as a co-parent and being expected to act like a parent to every child in her household. One is fair. The other isn't. Anyway, fast forward a bit because this is where things really start to go off the rails. As her household kept growing, it became harder and harder to keep those boundaries steady. At the beginning, we had found something that kind of worked. I was doing my part as a dad, fully present for my twins, without getting pulled into everything happening on her side. But over time, her expectations kept growing. It felt like every few months, there was something new. First it was her stepdaughter, then her husband's nephew, then the baby they had together. It was like layers kept getting added, one after another, and somehow I was expected to carry part of that weight. And then came the school trip. The school my kids go to is pretty small, so they run mixed-age classes. Because of that, my twins end up in the same classroom as their stepsister and step-cousin. It's a little unusual, sure, but it works for the school, and honestly, it never bothered me. What I didn't expect was how that setup would turn into a whole issue about money. This trip wasn't just some small field outing. It was a big deal. The school had organized a visit to this interactive museum, the kind of place where kids can actually touch things, experiment, learn hands-on. There were workshops planned, activities lined up, the whole thing. It sounded like an amazing experience for them. But it wasn't cheap. Not at all. Still, my twins were excited. Really excited. And to me, it felt like one of those moments that would turn into a great memory for them. Something they'd look back on later. I could afford it, so I didn't overthink it. I just went ahead and paid for them. Then I told Adu about it, thinking she'd be happy the twins were getting this opportunity. I was wrong. The second I mentioned that I'd paid for the trip, she went quiet. Not just normal quiet, but that kind of silence where you can tell something's coming. And then she said it flat out that if the other kids couldn't go too, then it wasn't fair. At first, I honestly thought she was joking. I mean, there was no way she seriously expected me to pay for the other two kids as well, right? But she wasn't joking. She was completely serious. She started going on about how it wasn't right for our kids to go on what she called a luxury trip if her other kids couldn't go too. I tried to stay calm, keep the conversation from spiraling. I told her plainly, I'm paying for my twins because they're my responsibility. I even tried to offer a reasonable middle ground. I suggested that maybe she and her husband could look into fundraising, or start setting money aside if it meant that much to them for the other kids to go. But that's when she hit me with it. She said I needed to think about how all the kids would feel watching my twins go on this trip while they were left behind. I'm all for fairness, I really am, but there's a line, and this was it. His stepdaughter and his nephew are not my responsibility, and I'm not made of money. I looked at him and asked him straight up, how exactly is it my job to pay for all the kids in your house? And the way he looked back at me, you'd think I was the one being unreasonable, like I was the selfish one in all of this. Then he started going off on this whole rant about how the kids are all supposed to be siblings, how they're growing up together, and how my actions were somehow sabotaging their family. I just sat there listening, trying to wrap my head around how this had even become my problem. Look, I get it. No kid wants to feel left out. I'm not heartless. But at some point, reality has to step in. I'm not their dad. I never was. Adu made the choice to bring these other kids into her life, into her home. She built a whole new family dynamic, and that's her right. But it doesn't automatically make me responsible for it. I'm not going to be guilt-tripped into paying for every child that ends up under her roof. What really pushed me, though, was the way both of them started framing it, like I was doing something cruel. They talked about how this would damage the kids' relationships, how it would create distance, and how it would somehow be my fault if my twins and their stepsister grew apart because of this. And I just sat there thinking, seriously? I mean, come on. I'm a dad trying to do something nice for my own kids. That's it. And somehow, it's been twisted into this whole dramatic situation about what I'm not doing for children who aren't even mine. So I said it clearly. I told them, look, I don't think it's fair to expect me to cover everyone's expenses. This trip is something special for my twins. It's during my time with them, and I want them to have that experience. I don't see how that's unfair to anyone. But Adu didn't let it go. She kept pushing, saying that if our twins go and the other kids don't, it's going to make them feel like they matter less, like they're being treated as less than, and that I should care about that. Her husband jumped back in too, talking about family unity, like it was some kind of obligation I had signed up for. He even said that if the kids end up resenting each other because of this, that would be on me. At that point, I was just done. Completely done. Because this wasn't about family unity. Not really. This was about them trying to turn their financial situation into my responsibility. And it's not like they're struggling just to get by. They both have decent jobs. If this trip really mattered that much to them, they could figure something out. They could save, budget, make it work. But instead, they were trying to put it on me. And that's not my job. It's not my responsibility to stretch my finances to cover what they can't or won't handle themselves. The conversation just kept going in circles. Over and over again, the same points. It's unfair. Think about the family. Think about the kids. And every time I gave the same answer. I stood my ground. I told them plainly that it wasn't my fault they couldn't send the other kids, and I wasn't going to let them guilt-trip me into paying for it. That's where we left it. But even as the conversation ended, I could see it on her face. This wasn't over. Not even close. I walked away from that whole thing feeling frustrated, and honestly, a little confused too. It didn't make sense to me how no matter how clearly I explained things, they just refused to hear it. It was like we were having two completely different conversations. Somehow, me focusing on my own kids had become a problem. Somehow, I'd been turned into the villain in their version of the story. And it was exhausting. All I wanted was to do something good for my twins, give them an experience they were excited about. That's it. But now it had turned into this massive issue about fairness and unity and everything in between. It felt like I was walking a tight rope, where even the smallest decision could set off another argument. All I wanted was to give my kids a fun experience. Apparently, that was too much. So after that whole argument about the school trip, I honestly thought maybe that would be the end of it, at least for a while. I figured I'd made my position clear. I wasn't paying for all the kids, and that should have been that. I hoped Adu and her husband would just let it go. But they didn't. Not even close. What came next, I didn't see coming at all. And to be honest, it completely caught me off guard. A few days after that argument, I got a message from Adu. She said she wanted to meet up and talk. And the second I read it, I knew this wasn't going to be some casual, friendly conversation over coffee. Still, I figured it was better to deal with it face to face than keep going back and forth over text. So I agreed. We picked a small diner, somewhere halfway between our places. Neutral ground. When she walked in, I could tell right away this wasn't going to be quick. She had that look on her face, the kind where you know someone has already planned out everything they're going to say. She sat down, didn't waste any time, and opened with, "I don't think you're understanding the situation." And in my head, I'm thinking, no, I understand it perfectly fine. I'm paying for my kids, and that's it. But I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. She went into this whole explanation about how I needed to look at the bigger picture. That this wasn't just about a school trip. According to her, this was about setting a standard for the future, about how we were going to handle things moving forward. It felt like she was trying to turn this into some kind of bigger principle, like if she framed it as a family philosophy, I'd feel pressured to go along with it. Then she started listing examples. She said this trip is just one situation, but there will be more. Activities, events, maybe even family vacations down the line. And according to her, we needed to be on the same page about treating all the kids equally. I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. For a second, I just sat there thinking, wait, is she actually suggesting that I should be paying for family vacations for all her kids now too? It sounded so unreal that I almost questioned if I'd misunderstood her. But I didn't interrupt. I just listened, keeping my reaction in check, because I knew the second I let my frustration show too much, it would only make everything worse. Then, like clockwork, she circled back to the same argument, fairness. She said if my kids get to do these things and the others don't, it's going to create resentment. That they're going to feel left out. She kept going, pushing it further, saying it could damage the kids' relationships with each other, that they'd grow up with this sense of inequality, and eventually it would tear them apart. And I'm just sitting there, listening to all of this, thinking, they're already different kids, from different families, living completely different lives. That's just the reality of the situation. So why, all of a sudden, is this my responsibility to fix? When she finally paused, I took a breath and tried to respond calmly. I told her I understood what she was trying to say, that I get why she wants all the kids to feel equal. But I reminded her as clearly as I could, these are not my kids. They're not my responsibility. I pointed out that we've been doing this parallel parenting thing for a while now. She handles things on her side. I handle things on mine. That's what has been working. At least it had been. But apparently for her that wasn't enough anymore. Because that's when she dropped what felt like the real point behind all of this. She looked at me and said that if I truly cared about the kids' well-being, I would want to support the whole family, not just my own kids. She kept going, talking about how I needed to show good faith, how I should step up and help with the other kids too. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I didn't know what else to do. Since when does supporting your own children suddenly mean taking on everyone else's as well? At that point, I could feel my patience starting to slip. I told her as firmly as I could, look, I do care about my kids' well-being. That's exactly why I'm willing to do these things for them. But I'm not going to let you guilt-trip me into paying for children who aren't mine. She didn't like that at all. Her whole expression changed. She got defensive, saying I was being selfish, that I wasn't thinking about how this would affect the kids in the long run. That's when I pushed back. I asked her straight up, how is it selfish to take care of my own kids? You made the choice to bring these other kids into your household. That's your decision, not mine. And right then, as if things weren't already tense enough, her husband showed up. I still don't know if that was planned or just a coincidence, but suddenly he's there, walking over to the table like he's been waiting for this moment. He barely even acknowledged me, didn't say hello, didn't try to keep things civil. He went straight to her, like he was stepping in to back her up. He sat down and immediately started in on me, like he'd been holding this in. He said, "I don't think you're being fair. We're supposed to be creating a family here, and your actions are putting up barriers." I just looked at him for a second, honestly wondering if he really expected me to buy into this whole "we're all one family" idea, especially when it came to my wallet. So I told him plainly, "I'm here to support my twins. That's what I signed up for. You can't expect me to just pretend that all these other kids are mine, especially when it comes to finances." And then he hit me with it. He said if the kids start hating each other because of this, that would be on me. That I'd be the one creating division. That's what set me off. I told him, "No, you're the one trying to push me into playing dad to kids that aren't mine. I'm not the one complicating this. I'm just trying to do right by my twins. That's it." At that point, I didn't really care how I came across. If he thought I was being cold, so be it. Because it felt like the two of them were teaming up on me, trying to corner me, trying to make me feel like the bad guy just for having basic boundaries. Things got heated after that. A dude jumped back in, saying that if the kids grow up resenting each other, it would all be because I didn't care enough to support their version of a family. She kept framing it like I was the one choosing to break something that could have worked. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. So I told her, if that's the case, then maybe you and your husband need to figure out a way to handle it. But don't put that responsibility on me. By then, people in the diner had definitely started noticing. I could feel eyes on us, hear the shift in the room, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. I was too frustrated, too fed up with being painted as the villain in a story that didn't even make sense. All I had wanted from the very beginning was to do something nice for my kids. That's it. And somehow, it had turned into this massive argument about what I supposedly owed to her entire household. It was like they expected me to just go along with whatever came up, to fund everything for every kid under their roof, just because they had decided to build this blended family. That's when I realized there was no point in dragging it out any longer. I stood up, looked at both of them and said, "I've said what I needed to say. My focus is on my twins, and that's not going to change. If you want everything to be equal, then maybe you need to look at what you're doing, not what I'm doing. I'm done being the bad guy here." And with that, I walked out of that diner with a strange mix of frustration and relief sitting heavy in my chest. It felt like I just spent all that time talking in circles, trying to explain something that should have been simple, and yet none of it had landed. No matter what I said, they just weren't going to get it. As I stepped outside, I could still feel their eyes on me, like they were expecting me to turn around, come back, and finally give in to what they wanted. But I didn't. At that point, I was done. I had drawn my line, made my boundaries clear, and I wasn't about to let anyone push me into something I never agreed to. Wanting your kids to feel like they belong to a family is one thing, but expecting someone else to carry the financial weight of that entire idea, that's something else entirely. After that whole disaster at the diner, I honestly thought things might finally settle down. I figured maybe Adu and her husband would realize I wasn't going to budge, that they'd take the hint and just move on. But looking back, I should have known it wouldn't be that simple, because it didn't end there. Not even close. A few days later, my phone started blowing up with long, drawn-out messages. First, it was her sister. Normally, she's pretty easygoing, the kind of person who stays out of other people's issues. So when I saw her name pop up, I was surprised. But then I read the message. She started talking about how important it was for the kids to feel like they were part of one big family. How unity mattered. How these things shape kids as they grow up. And then came the part that got under my skin, the subtle implication that if I really cared about my kids' happiness, I would just go along with it. That I would do this for them. It didn't feel like advice. It felt like pressure. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself maybe she'd said her piece and that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. The messages kept coming, and with each one, the tone shifted. What started as soft suggestions turned into something sharper. Suddenly, I was being labeled selfish, stingy, someone who couldn't see the bigger picture. The way they talked about it, you'd think I was tearing apart some perfect, happy family just because I refused to pay for a trip for kids who aren't even mine. It was like they'd all decided I was the problem, that I was the one causing all this tension. Honestly, it felt like I had declared war or something, all because I said no. And then it got worse. One day, out of nowhere, Adu's mom called me. I hadn't spoken to her in a long time, so seeing her name on my phone caught me off guard. For a moment, I thought maybe she wanted to talk about the twins, maybe have a calm, reasonable conversation. Couldn't have been more wrong. The second I picked up, she went straight into it. No small talk, no easing into the conversation. Just a full-on lecture about how things should be. She told me flat out that if I would just pay for all the kids, none of this would even be an issue. That I needed to think about how much better everything would be if I were more involved with all of them. I could feel my patience slipping almost immediately. I tried to keep it respectful. I told her, as calmly as I could, with all due respect, those kids are not my responsibility. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do for my own children, and that's what I signed up for. But she didn't stop. She kept going, saying things like a good man steps up, that a real father takes care of the whole family, not just his own kids. Hearing that honestly stunned me. I didn't even know how to respond at first. Still, I tried. I explained that wanting the best for my twins doesn't mean I have to financially support every child her daughter has brought into her household. I told her clearly, I'm not going to feel guilty for taking care of my own kids and setting reasonable boundaries. But it didn't matter. It was like she wasn't even listening. The conversation just kept spiraling. Around and around, the same points repeated over and over. She kept talking about duty, about responsibility, about how the kids would suffer. And yeah, she leaned hard into the guilt, trying every angle to make me feel like I was the one doing something wrong. By the time the call ended, I was drained. I told her politely that we weren't going to agree on this and ended the conversation. But even then, it didn't stop. Over the next week or so, it felt like the entire family had been pulled into this. Like they were all coordinating, all pushing the same message, trying to wear me down. At one point, Adu's brother even commented on one of my social media posts. It was one of those posts about being a dad, something simple. But his comment, it was loaded, passive-aggressive in a way that was impossible to miss. Real dads support their families no matter what. It was obvious what he meant. He wasn't talking about just my kids. I didn't reply. I didn't engage. I just deleted the comment and moved on. But I won't lie, it got to me. Because here I was, doing everything I could for my twins, showing up, being present, providing for them, and somehow, in their eyes, that made me the bad guy. One day, I dropped the kids off at Adu's place like I always do. Nothing unusual about it. But as I was heading back to my car, her husband caught up to me. No greeting. No small talk. No pretending things were normal. He went straight into it. You know you're hurting the kids with this. I stopped, honestly caught off guard. I thought we'd already gone over this, already said everything that needed to be said. But clearly he wasn't finished. He kept going, talking about how my decision not to pay for all the kids was creating distance between them. That it was driving a wedge between the siblings. That I needed to think more about the family dynamic. I looked at him and said, as clearly as I could, I'm not hurting anyone. I'm taking care of my kids. They're not the ones struggling here. But he didn't let it go. Not even for a second. He just kept going, repeating himself in different ways, saying that everyone in the family thought I was being unfair, that sooner or later the kids would pick up on it, and when they did, they'd start resenting each other. The way he said it, it felt like he was trying to put the entire weight of their family's happiness on me. Like somehow it was all my responsibility to keep everything balanced, to make sure no one ever felt left out. And I just wasn't going to accept that. So I told him straight, your family's opinion doesn't change my responsibilities. I'm not their dad. I'm here for my kids, and that's not going to change. After that, I didn't really have anything else left to say. Felt pointless. No matter what I did, no matter how clearly I explained it, they had already made up their minds. In their story, I was the villain, the guy who didn't care enough, the one causing all the problems. That night, I sat alone for a long time, just trying to make sense of how everything had spiraled like this. All I had wanted, from the beginning, was to take care of my kids, to give them good experiences, to be there for them. That was it. And somehow, that had turned into me being painted as this cold, uncaring person who didn't believe in family unity. It didn't make sense. It felt like they couldn't see the difference between what was fair and what wasn't, or maybe they just didn't want to. Eventually, I ended up venting to a couple of close friends. I needed to get it out of my system. When I told them everything, they were just as shocked as I had been. They couldn't believe the kind of pressure Adu's family was putting on me. One of them even joked that if they were also worried about the kids missing out, they could pool their money together and pay for the trip themselves. I laughed when he said it because honestly it was kind of true. But at the same time, it didn't really make it any less frustrating. Because underneath it all, it really felt like her entire family had decided that I was somehow obligated to step up and be this all-in parent to a bunch of kids who weren't mine. And for what? Just to keep the peace with people who clearly didn't respect my boundaries in the first place? The whole situation left a bad taste in my mouth. Day after day, it was more of the same: texts, calls, messages from different people, all saying the same thing in slightly different ways. It felt like they had built this idea in their heads that I owed them something, and they weren't going to stop until I gave in. By the end of that week, I realized something important. Trying to explain myself wasn't going to work. They weren't listening. They didn't want to understand my side. They just wanted me to fall in line. And that wasn't going to happen. I told myself right then, I'm not letting them wear me down. My kids are my responsibility. That's where it starts and ends. I'm not going to let an entire extended family guilt trip me into changing that. It's honestly crazy when I think about it. This whole thing started because I wanted to pay for my kids' school trip. That's it. Something simple. And now it had turned into this full-blown battle over who was doing enough for the whole family. They might not like it. They might never agree with me. But I knew where I stood. After a full week of constant messages, unsolicited advice, and non-stop guilt-tripping from Adu's family, I made a decision. Final one. I needed to draw a clear line and stick to it no matter what. No exceptions. Because at that point, I was done. It was obvious to me that no matter how many times I explained myself, they weren't going to get it. They were completely locked into this idea of one big happy family, and in their eyes, I was the problem. The one standing in the way, just because I refused to pay for every kid they kept adding into their household. So I started with what mattered most. I sat down with my twins and talked to them about the upcoming trip. I wanted to make sure they were still excited about it, that they weren't feeling weird or guilty after everything that had been going on. The last thing I wanted was for them to feel like any of this was their fault. I kept it simple. I just told them, hey, I'm really looking forward to this trip for you guys. And I want you to know this is something special just for the two of you. I didn't go into any of the messy details. They didn't need to hear all that. But I did want them to understand one thing, that it was okay for them to enjoy something that was just theirs. Both of them seemed relieved. Kids always pick up on tension, even when you try to hide it, and I could tell they had noticed something. But seeing them smile, seeing that excitement come back, it lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. They didn't feel guilty. They were just happy. And that mattered more than anything. In that moment, I knew I was doing the right thing. They deserved to have good experiences, to enjoy things without feeling responsible for anyone else. Once that was settled, I knew the next step was unavoidable. I had to set a clear, firm boundary with Adu and her family. Not just the usual "I'm paying for my kids" kind of statement, but something stronger. Something that left no room for interpretation. So I called her. I kept my tone calm, steady. I didn't want it turning into another long, exhausting argument. I told her plainly, my role as a parent is to support my twins. I'm here for them, and I'm doing everything I can to give them good experiences. But that responsibility does not extend to other children who aren't mine. I told her as calmly as I could, I respect your choices, and I respect your family, but my financial responsibility ends with my twins. Of course, she didn't take that well. Adu was clearly upset. She went right back into it, talking about how the other kids would feel, how it wasn't fair for siblings to have different experiences, how this would affect them. I let her talk at first. I didn't interrupt. But the moment she started slipping back into that same guilt-tripping tone, I stopped her. I told her, I understand how you feel. I really do. But this is my final decision. I'm not going to be paying for anything beyond our twins. I made it as clear as I possibly could. I told her if she wanted to figure something out for her household, that was her choice, her responsibility. But she needed to stop putting that pressure on me. There was a pause after that. A long one. I could practically feel the frustration on the other end of the call. I knew she was upset, maybe even angry, but I didn't budge. Not even a little. For a moment, it felt like she was about to try again, like she was searching for one last argument, one last angle that might make me change my mind. But then something shifted. Maybe she realized it wasn't going anywhere. Finally, she just said something along the lines of, "Fine, I guess you've made your choice." The way she said it, it was meant to sting, meant to make me feel guilty. But it didn't. Honestly, all I felt in that moment was relief. For the first time in a while, I wasn't trying to explain myself, defend myself, or justify anything. I was just done. And after that, things got quiet. No more random messages from her family. No more passive-aggressive comments. No more constant pressure. Just silence. Yeah, it was a little awkward at first. That kind of silence always is. But at the same time, it felt good. Peaceful, even. Like something had finally settled. I think at that point they realized I wasn't going to bend. That no matter how much they pushed, I wasn't going to give in. And eventually, they just had to accept it. In the weeks leading up to the trip, I made a point of spending extra time with my twins. Nothing big, nothing extravagant. Just normal, everyday things. We'd grab something to eat, go to the park, watch movies together, the usual stuff. I wanted everything to feel normal for them. Stable. I didn't want them caught up in any of the tension between the adults. And honestly, it was nice. Just being with them, without all the extra noise, without the drama hanging over everything. It reminded me what all of this was really about. Then finally, the day of the trip came. I dropped them off at school that morning, and they were all smiles. Excited, full of energy, ready to go. Seeing them like that, after everything that had happened, it felt good. Really good. As they ran off to join their friends, I stood there for a moment just watching them, and I felt this sense of satisfaction settle in. Like, yeah, this is what matters. It's not about making everyone happy. It's not about bending over backwards for people who don't appreciate it. It's about doing right by your kids, giving them the best you can, teaching them by example that it's okay to have boundaries. And then, the next day, something happened that I honestly didn't expect. I got a call from Adu. Going into it, I was prepared for the usual. Maybe a passive-aggressive comment, maybe some kind of jab. But instead, she just asked a simple question. Did the kids have fun? I told her they did. I kept it short, didn't want to open the door to another long conversation. But then she surprised me. She thanked me, not in a sarcastic way, not in a backhanded way. She actually thanked me for sticking to what I believed was right. She said, "I didn't agree with you, but I respect that you stood up for yourself and your kids." I didn't really know what to say to that. I was honestly shocked. I hadn't expected her to come around, not even a little. But there it was. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it felt like something close. Like an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the villain they had all made me out to be. And after that, things changed. They didn't become perfect, but they got better. A lot better. It was quieter, more respectful. I didn't hear from her family anymore. No more pressure, no more comments. It felt like we had reached some kind of understanding. We still don't agree on everything, and maybe we never will. But we both seem to have accepted our roles when it comes to the kids. And honestly, that's made a huge difference for me. I'm not constantly second-guessing myself anymore. I'm not sitting there wondering how every decision I make is going to affect her household. I just focus on my twins. And in a way, I think all of this has made me a better dad. Because at the end of the day, this whole situation taught me something I probably needed to learn. Setting boundaries isn't just about saying no to other people. It's about saying yes to your own peace of mind. I've learned that it's okay to prioritize my own family. It's okay not to feel guilty about that. And if other people don't understand it, that's on them. Not me. So yeah, things are in a good place now. The twins are happy. I'm happy. And it finally feels like we're moving forward without all that extra weight dragging everything down. I've made it clear where I stand. And I think at this point everyone, even Adu and her husband, have come to respect that. It's not perfect. I'm sure there will be more bumps along the way. But now I know something I didn't fully understand before. I can stand my ground. I can make decisions that are right for my family without getting lost in everyone else's expectations. And that's something I'm not letting go of. A few weeks after everything had finally settled down, just when I thought maybe things would stay that way, something new came up. I really thought I'd heard the last of it. After everything that had happened, after all the arguments, the pressure, the silence that followed, I figured maybe that was it. Maybe we were finally done with the demands. But then Adu reached out again. At first, it didn't seem like anything serious. She started talking about the twins and their living situation at her place. She mentioned how things were different there, how they didn't have the same comforts they have when they're with me. The way she said it, I assumed she was just venting, just sharing her frustrations like people sometimes do. I listened, not thinking much of it. But then the tone shifted. She started hinting, subtly at first, that I should do something about it. That's when I started to realize where this was going. And when she finally said it outright, I honestly had to pause for a second to process what I was hearing. She wanted me to buy a house. Not for me. Not even for the kids in the way you'd normally expect. For them, at her place. She was completely serious. She actually expected me to buy a second house so that when the twins stayed with her, they could live in it, and of course she would too. All of it paid for by me. I just sat there, trying to wrap my head around it. It didn't make sense. None of it did. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't help asking, how does that make any sense? You already have a home. But that didn't slow her down. She went straight into explaining how their current house was too small for a family of that size. How it wasn't enough for all of them. And then she started talking about how it was affecting the kids' mental well-being, how going back and forth between two different standards of living could hurt their self-esteem. She kept coming back to that idea, equal standards. Like somehow, it was my responsibility to make up for every decision she had made since we split up. Like I was supposed to balance everything out financially so nothing ever felt different for the kids. And the more she talked, the more unreal it felt. When I finally told her that wasn't going to happen, she didn't take it well. Not at all. She went straight back to the same tactics, pulling out every guilt trip she could think of. Don't you want the kids to feel just as comfortable at my place as they do with you? Isn't it unfair that you're not willing to provide for their full living experience? The way she said it, you'd think I was refusing to do the bare minimum, like I was neglecting them somehow, all because I wouldn't buy her family a new house. At that point, I was done. Completely done. I told her as clearly as I could, look, the twins have everything they need at your place. They're not lacking anything essential. And if you think they need a bigger house, that's something you and your husband need to figure out. I'm not responsible for upgrading your home. There was a brief pause after that. Just silence. Then she snapped back, saying, well, if the kids end up feeling like they only have a real home with you, that's going to be on you. I just shook my head. There wasn't anything left to say. That was the end of the conversation. And honestly, I still don't understand how she thought that was a reasonable thing to ask. I want the best for my kids, I always have and I always will. But that doesn't mean I'm responsible for building an entirely new lifestyle for her. At this point, it feels like there's no limit to what she might ask for. But one thing is clear now. I've drawn the line, and I'm not moving it.